Okay, well, I have 12 o'clock, so let's get started. We have a lot of material to get through. Welcome back to those of you who were with us on Tuesday. You are here at the Systematic Review Workshop Series Part 2. My name is Christine Neilson. I'm doing the presenting today. My colleagues Janice Linton and Mê-Linh Lay are also involved with the series this year. Today, Mê-Linh is monitoring chat. So if you have questions throughout, please feel free to type them in the chat, and either Mê-Linh will answer or she'll read out your question in case others might be interested as well. Okay. So, and Mê-Linh will also get you to keep an eye on the waiting room so that any latecomers will be able to join in. So, oops. Okay, so like I said, this is a series. This is part 2, setting up a search. As a quick reminder, if anybody here is a grad student and you want your attendance on the co-curricular record, pardon me, when you register for the sessions, please indicate that you want to have that added. We will be sending attendance for anyone who has attended all 5 of the sessions to grad studies, and we'll facilitate that way. Just like last week, we are recording, and the slides as well as the recording are going to be added to our KS website at a later date. I'm told that the session from Tuesday, the post-production folks are working their magic, and we hope to have it up sometime next week. Okay. Right, I am going to
Christine, sorry to interrupt. Yeah. Do you mind just making me the co-host as well, just so I can let people in if they come in a little bit later? Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. Sorry about that. My fault. Okay. Now let's get started. I am going to quickly just turn off my camera just for the purposes of bandwidth and all that good stuff. So let's go. So just in case there's any confusion, this session focuses on laying the groundwork for documentation that's required for your systematic review, scope and review, or other type of KS review, right? And so we're not talking about like how to search a database, but this is just as important, right? Because I use the word required on purpose. It's not just that, the 3 of us decided that this is what you should do. There are internationally recognized guidelines for this type of work that lay out what you need to keep track of and report when you write your manuscript. Okay, so just to kind of kick things off, get everyone thinking about documentation, we're going to start off with a quick Menti quiz, like one whole question. So you can either use the QR code that's up on your screen with your device, or you can go to menti.com, and I'll just switch over real quick so that you can see the number, right? The number is at the top here, so 93303801. Okay, and the big question is, when you're writing your manuscript, which information about the literature search is not required for your article, your published KS review? We have 5 options: the database names and vendors, the number of articles you found, the most recent date the search was run, search terms that you tried but you decided not to use, and search terms that you used in the final version of the search. And I'll just give you a couple minutes. It looks like the answers have stopped pouring in. So the correct answer is number 4, the stuff that you tried but you didn't use. You do need to have all the rest of that information in your manuscript when you publish it. Okay. So let's keep going. You probably read the objectives in the little posting advertising the session. And as expected, it's all about organization, right? So when we get kind of looking at what we need to do, I've broken it down into 6 things, right? So we're going to talk about getting organized broadly, real quick. We will have the briefest of refreshers, talking about review types, more specifically systematic versus scoping reviews, because I know there were some questions about that in the people who attended last time. We're talking about search documentation. We're going to talk about setting up personal accounts for individual databases. We're going to talk about search logs for databases, as well as searching great literature. So, like I said, we're focused on getting organized, but before you even think about doing the literature search, you really want to get organized as a whole, right? And like Janice said on Tuesday, KS reviews are huge undertakings. They involve a team of researchers that bring a variety of specialized knowledge and expertise to the project, and they take a really long time. One of the challenges that's been acknowledged with these types of projects is just the scope. The communication and sharing information can be a challenge because team members might be scattered in different locations, and they will almost definitely have competing priorities, right? Because very, very few people are doing this as like their full-time job. So you and your team are going to need to figure out what tools that you want to use in terms of setting meetings, holding the meetings, right? Sharing your files, right, while the review is active. But you also need to think about where you're going to house supplementary material that you want to make available, but you won't have enough space in your manuscript, right? So those are your public documents. Okay. And because I'm a librarian, my mind goes to the search all the time. The search is a great example, right? So current guidelines say we need to make the complete search strategies for all of the databases used in the review. So if I look at 5 databases, I need to include 5. But journals generally don't give you enough space for that, right? So you have to find a place to house them where you can point people. Where's that going to be, right? So there's all kinds of tools that are available. As a group, you need to sit down and figure out what's going to work best for you. Okay. When you have figured out where you're going to store your files, whether that's like on a shared drive or Google Docs or whatever, you want to set up a folder structure to organize all the different pieces of the review. And we've got a sample, and believe it or not, that underlined download is a link. I changed programs, so unfortunately, not all the color is tracking. And I've got an example here, right? So you have all your different pieces, right? So you have kind of administrative docs, things related to your protocol, things related to your lit search. You're doing article retrieval, right? So if you are gathering PDFs and such, where are you going to put them? If you're putting out requests for interlibrary loan for things that we don't have access to through the library, you want to keep that, I guess it's an email confirmation, right, somewhere, so that you have a record of what you've ordered, that kind of thing, and so on and so forth, right? And if we go to the literature search, for example, like there would be subfolders that you might be interested in, right? So search strategies is a pretty obvious one, but you also need to have RIS files somewhere. And I'm going to talk about RIS files in a minute, right? So that's just an example of a folder structure. You also need to have a chat about naming conventions for your files. Okay, so meaningful names are important. And a good example here is when you are searching for results and you get your RIS export from whatever database you're using, right? So when you export from a database, the default name it gives it is something like export or RIS or something equally unhelpful, right? So you need to give it a name that tells you exactly what's in that file, because you're going to be dealing with multiple RIS files from multiple databases, and you need to be able to tell them apart. So in my example here, You can see right away that this file came from a Medline search from April that was run on April 6th, 2023. It's an RIS format, and it includes records numbers 1 to 875. Right? You're going to need all this information later when you upload these files into Covidence. And Covidence is something we talk about in more detail in session 5. Right? The other example we have here is the dreaded final or draft. I mean, like, I'm pretty sure everyone has seen files where it's like, okay, this is the final one, and then it's changes are made. So now it's like final, and then maybe like final. And that's generally not terribly useful. So we want to avoid things like that, right? Minimize confusion at all possible opportunities. Okay. Pardon me. How are we doing for questions, Mê-Linh?
We're all good, Christine.
We're all good. Incidentally, if I'm ever going too fast or too slow, please feel free to indicate. I do get a little excited about this stuff, so I might be talking a little fast. All right, so let's move on then. I said we were going to talk about review types ever so briefly, and there are tons of different review types. As a reminder from last week, like Janice said, each one is appropriate under different circumstances. Janice mentioned our Which Review is Right for You tool, but you can also read articles that discuss the differences. The one at the top of the list here says typology of reviews. There's even an easy to read table that Duke University made available that you can check out if you like as well. Right, that article is a little older, 2009. Since then, about 10 years later, a follow-up, I guess, article came out where they've kind of clustered different types of reviews into families, right? So that one might be useful for you as well. But just to say a couple quick words about the difference between scoping reviews and systematic reviews. So an example of a scoping review question is something that is broad. It tends to answer kind of exploratory what and how questions, right? So I pulled a few questions from a review that are good examples of scoping review. So how is this concept conceptualized in the literature? How do researchers view, the role of resilience with higher ed and workplace readiness? To what is the extent and nature of interventions targeting student resilience, in higher education, right? So these are very broad, kind of what's going on out there kind of questions. Systematic on the review, on the other hand, is not an open-ended question. It has a much narrower focus. And an example of a question that might be kind of a complement to these ones here would be, do mindfulness meditation exercises increase nursing students' level of resilience? Very focused, right? And a SR question generally has 3 possible answers, right? Yes, no, or we can't tell because there's not enough research data available to make a conclusion, right? So this is a kind of an example of the difference between these types of reviews, right? So very broad, exploratory is scoping, very focused, more yes or no type questions is a systematic review. All right. Let's move on. I believe Janice would have said Tuesday also, that depending on the review that you're going to do, you might have different levels of searching. But regardless of the type of review, there are guidelines that you need to follow. And there are 2 kinds of guidelines. There are methodological guidelines and there are reporting guidelines. Okay, so what's the difference? A methodological guideline, that's your instruction manual, right? It's telling you how to conduct your review properly. Okay, and there are various examples. Again, these are some links here. When the PDF is posted, you will be able to click on them. And there are quite a few examples from health. There's also the Campbell collaboration in social sciences. If you're in the social sciences, that might be some place to look, right? A reporting guideline or checklist, on the other hand, tells you what you need to include in your manuscript when you write up the project, right? And this is to make sure that when you publish your article, it's transparent and other people could replicate it if they wanted to. Okay. And again, there's all kinds of reporting guidelines that are out there. Janice mentioned Prisma the other day, right? That's the one that was formed for systematic reviews, but they've got a whole bunch of variations now of Prisma. So like Prisma P is for when you're doing your protocol. Prisma S is for a literature search. So for all reviews can use Prisma S, and this tells you what information that's in that you need to include, that's related to your literature search, right? We've got some from environmental science. Again, we've got some from social science. And like I keep saying, this is not telling you how to do the project, right? That's your methods guidelines. If you're ever reading an article and the authors say that they conducted their review according to Prisma guidelines, that's a hint that they might not have the most solid understanding of systematic review methodology, because the R in Prisma stands for reporting, right? It's just the information you need to include. For our discussion today, the reporting guidelines are important because that's directly related to documentation. It's what you need to keep track of. And this is just a screenshot of the checklist for Prisma S, right? And you can see different elements that you need to include. And when you look at checklists like this one over on the far right, you can see when you do your checklist, you have a spot to say where, like what page you have this information on, right? So you can make sure you've got everything. So keep talking about documentation and how it's important. Why do we bother? I mentioned transparency, right? So accountability, reproducibility of process. That's what these guidelines are trying to promote. But a slightly more practical consideration is that you need to be ready for anything, right? Like we all hear jokes about reviewer number 2, right? And so when you're doing up your manuscript and you submit it, you might have someone say, okay, well, why did you do X instead of Y? And keeping good documentation on your choices will help you justify your process and what you've done, right? Also, this takes a long time, and it's really easy to forget. Trust me, I know. So if you forget why you searched for one term but not the others, then you might have a problem. Okay. Secondly, the odds are also pretty good that because it takes so long, by the time you submit your manuscript, your search is going to be out of date, and you're going to have to redo it to make sure that nothing has come out in the meantime that should be included in your review, right? So generally speaking, in terms of like process, I guess, you would probably submit your manuscript, and then after, assuming it's been 6 months or longer since you started, right? Since you did the search. And then after you get your feedback, then you would update the search, and then whatever new things that come out, you could integrate into your analysis, and then you'll be up to date, right? So what do you need to keep? Obviously, you want to look at those reporting standards and keep track of the items that are listed there. Just as a summary, right? Your testing searches. I mentioned, what your thought processes was, why you chose to do something instead of something else, your keywords, your subject terms, where you looked, when you looked, how many things you found. You also need to have, as I mentioned earlier, the finalized search strategies for all of the databases that you used, not just one. And that has to include search syntax. And I'll I'll kind of point out what I mean in a minute. And you also want to have those individual RIS export files from the individual databases. And you might be thinking, well, Christine, why don't I just direct export into EndNote or something? That's just, one step less for me. And I have two reasons for you to not do that. You want to keep the export files as separate files because when you do use Covidence later, you need to import them separately. You also want to have them as a backup. Every once in a while, something goes horrifically wrong, right? I know I've had EndNote libraries that have gotten corrupted, and it's just unusable. So if I have those RIS files, I can delete the corrupted library and just start again. Just make a new one, import my RIS files again, and nothing is lost. Little bit of an insurance policy. Okay. So we have kind of a sample question here and some documentation that goes along with it. This was a search that one of our colleagues did a while back. I'm not sure exactly when. But if we have a look, this is a screenshot here of one of the working documents, right? So we've got, whenever we do a search, we break our search down into concepts. You can see here concept number 1 is IBD. Okay, so they found different mesh terms that would be useful. They've kind of brainstormed some keywords, and then they've also got notes, right? Because they've tried things out, and you can see like as a keyword IBD has been crossed out, and you can see in the notes field beside, it's just got too many other acronyms that have the same letters, right? So it was not useful. Likewise, a little further down, pouchitis. You can see there's a note saying, that it's not relevant, and there's an email, conversation amongst the team that indicates this, right? So if we kind of keep going here, we have, concept number 2, same kind of thing, right? Identified useful mesh terms, keywords, and then if you notice in notes at the bottom, there's some additional terms that I think might be worth testing, right? Like family days, sick days, that kind of thing. And then it's a little small, but we've got kind of the final version of this search, right? And you can see what they did here, right? So lines 1 through 38. When I mentioned search syntax, this is what I'm talking about, right? So we can see there's some stuff in here that if you don't really do a lot of searching, you might not understand. So like, the keywords are followed by .tw, kw, right? That means something, right? So does the exp and the slashes and brackets and all that stuff, right? So just keeping a list of keywords is not good enough. We need to be able to demonstrate how we use those words, and this is how we do that, right? So I am going to actually, I'm not going to do it quite yet. Sorry, hold on. So we do have some tips, right? And the first is, you're gonna do some testing, right? There is documentation out there, like people have looked, and I guess it's not this slide. I don't have the notes, but it was something like 26 hours is the average time it takes an experienced librarian to come up with a finalized version of a literature search for a systematic review, right? It takes a long time. Usually we start with one, work with that, and then move on to the rest. But you want to keep track of your process, as I said. So you want to have all the dates that you were doing your searches. You want to have anything kind of weird that you notice that shows up. If you are using terms or search filters, Janice is going to talk about search filters next time. in the searching session. You have to make sure that you keep track of those too, because where you got them from, because you need to cite them, right? They are the product of someone else's intellectual labor. You can't just kind of lift them and not give acknowledgement, right? And you also want to make note of any particularly like key papers, right, that you would use to test your search, because that's something that we do as well, right? So if we know there are these 5 awesome articles about the topic, you know, you do your search, you know, figure out your terms and everything, and then you check to see if those articles are in there, right? If they're not, then you need to figure out why. The idea being, if you can get a search that finds the test articles, it's going to also find similar articles as well. And if you're not finding 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or any of them, then you need to make some changes, right? So that's a good way to see if your search strategy is up to par. Okay. And like we say, just write it down. Well, you don't have to like physically write it down, but make notes. Here it is. There was a 2018 study, and they outlined, you know, different search-related tasks, and it was an average of 27 hours. And arguably, that's the fastest part of systematic review, is the search, right? So it's going to take a long time. You are probably not going to remember like really little details. So documentation is your friend. How are we doing for questions, Mê-Linh?
Still good.
Still good. Excellent. Oh, this did not turn out well. Okay. Sorry, folks. I did a last minute platform change. So you're just going to have to listen to what I'm saying. The bit about signing up for database accounts, I mentioned earlier. This is a bit of a pro tip, right? Because if you sign up for an account with a database vendor, right? So EBSCO here, this is a vendor. It's not a database itself. It's the company that we get the database from. You can search super easily later because you save what you've done, right? So if I set up a EBSCO account, I've listed a bunch of different databases here that we get through EBSCO, right? So the perfected search that I did in CINAHL, if 8 months go by, I got to do it again. I can just go to EBSCO and sign in and get it to run it. I don't have to try and like copy and paste it or type it in manually and maybe make some mistakes and stuff. It'll just go, right? So I am going to go to the University of Manitoba Libraries. I am going to go into one of the Ovid databases. Unfortunately, the Ovid databases in the list did not show up. I'm going to go in through Medline. We've got Medline. There's, I believe, Green File, or was Green File in EBSCO? No, Green Files in EBSCO. But CAB abstracts is in Ovid. The food science abstracts is in Ovid. There are a ton of Ovid databases that we subscribe to as well. International Pharmaceutical Abstracts. It's another one. So when you're in the database, right, they're going to call it something different depending on the database. In Ovid, it's called My Workspace. And if you create an account, this account is separate from the library, right? This is between you and Ovid. And you can save a bunch of things, right? So I've got my searches and alerts link here. And I'm just going to skip right down to the bottom. And you can see I've got a bunch of searches, right? So, and whenever I want, I can just like check off the box and hit run, and it's going to do it. So Before I do that though, I want to point out my naming convention, right? So I've got the name of my review, Youth Coping with Chronic Pain. It's a systematic review. I've also labeled it with the database, right? Because Ovid has more than one database that it supplies to us. So if I'm in PsycInfo and I run the Medline search, the database is like what's underneath, under the hood, is different enough that it's not going to run properly. So I need to do the right one for the right database, right? So if I'm in Medline, so I'm going to click off Medline and hit run. And you can see like this is a pretty long search, right? If I had to retype this in or copy and paste it, A, it would take more time than I want to spend, and B, I might make some mistakes in the process, right? So it is executing my search, and in a couple of minutes, it's going to take us back to the main search page, and we can see the results. And here too, you can see the search has syntax attached to it, right? So there are these slashes. The slash indicates the subject heading. We've got, .ti, comma, ab dot, that indicates where in the record it's looking, right? So those are field codes. Janice is going to talk about all this stuff. So big plug for Janice's session next. Well, that was relatively fast, right? It skips down to the bottom. I could expand it if I wanted to, but I can see, this search retrieved 499 things, right? That's pretty handy. So we always recommend that if you're going to be doing big projects like this, where you're going to be going back, or even if you're not sure you're going back, but you just might be going back and doing it again, that you set up a database account and make sure to write down your login information someplace where you're going to be able to find it too. So I have Scopus is just kind of peeking off down the page here. Scopus is kind of a unique thing. There are a bunch of databases that we get through EBSCO. There are a bunch that we get through Ovid. ProQuest is another one. That there are a whole bunch of databases we get from them. Scopus is its own thing, right? So that's the one that's slightly different. All right, so just to kind of summarize, when you're setting up an account, you want to make sure that you're going to be consistent and have good naming practices, right? So in this example here, it's slightly different than the one that I had. They've got the date in there. In the one I just showed you, I had the date in the notes, and the date was just below the name of the search, right? Don't worry about numbers of results, putting that in the name of your search, because those change. Like they're always adding new things all the time. So I would be extremely surprised if you came back after 6 months and the number of results that you got was the same, unless it was a very, very focused search for something that doesn't change really quickly. Okay. Also, something to note is that Ovid lets you save your search details with a link. And so far, I mean, Mê-Linh can correct me if I'm wrong, but so far Ovid is the only one that does that. And you can see here, if I go back to the Medline search, I can copy a search history link here, right? So right now it's copied it. I can paste it in an email, put it in a document, and that link will, when you click on it, run the search, right? Obviously, you need to have access to Medline for that to work. But that's another way of running things fairly quickly. You have to run them again. We can also copy search history details, right? And so this search history, this whole thing here, this is the search history, right? So we can copy the search history details and put that in like an Excel file or something for later. And that's nice because then you don't have to worry about weird formatting that sometimes happen when you try to like copy and paste stuff from websites. So that's handy. So let's go back to our slides. You mentioned the database search logs, right? And this is related to those search histories, right? So you want to have a record of what you've done. And I'm just going to show you an example here. So there are a variety of tabs along the bottom, right? The tab we're looking at right now is search summary. So here's, various databases that were searched, the interface that was used, because you might not know this, but Medline, as an example, is available through Ovid, but it's also available from other vendors as well. And the different interfaces from different vendors can work slightly differently, right? So a search in Ovid Medline will not necessarily run if you were to copy and paste it into Medline through EBSCO, for example, right? This is an important distinction. We've got the date of the search. Whoever did this one, there's I have view only access to this example. It should have the database dates in this column, which means basically the last time they added records, right? So if we look at Medline here, you can see it's got this big long title, and it's 1946 to April 5th, 2023, right? So we know that anything that was published today, the 6th, is obviously not going to be in those results, but it has records up until yesterday. Not all databases upload records every day. Some of them do it every week, right? So it's important to know how current the database is, right? And this is also useful for when you're still working on stuff, right? So like for the sake of argument, you are doing your test searching and someone says, hey, there's this article, it is perfect, came across it. Is it in the search? Does the search retrieve it? And it doesn't. It might be that, I mean, the Medline search here is pretty up to date, but if it's a different database and it was last updated on Monday, today is Friday, and yesterday this other article came out, it's not going to be in there. Doesn't mean it wouldn't catch it next week, but if you're kind of trying to do some problem solving and say, well, geez, why isn't it should be here? Why isn't it here? It's a data point, right? It's something to consider. Right. This particular person also likes to keep track of the order that they imported things into their reference management software. So if you are using something like EndNote and you're doing like removal of duplicates, it keeps the one that was added first and gets rid of the newer stuff, right? So we won't get into the details of the implications of that, but that's just what that ordered import means. Okay, we've got the initial count, right? So the number of articles that showed up in these individual databases, and then the number of articles after they did some removal of duplicates. They've got in the next the update date, right? So they did their search in May of 2020. Year later in June is when they did their update. It took them that long to do their project, right? And again, we've got the new items, right? So from that year, and then the deduping as well. And if we go to one of the items, one of the database tabs, you can see, right? I can't adjust it, shucks. The column is a little narrow, so you can't see it very well here. We've got like the initial search strategy. It says test run. And then this is their finalized, right? And so this was the one that they did on May 19th, 2020. Okay, likewise, they've translated it into other databases. So if we go to the Cochrane one looks very different, right? And I'm, try again, can I actually, no, I can't. If we could make the columns a bit longer, or wider, I should say, we could see them better. Let's try CINAHL. CINAHL is better. Okay. Still gets cut off a little bit, but you can see that there's differences, like I said, in that syntax, right? What's in this query box is different. How are we doing? I can't see the chat, but I see there's like a bunch of things that are in it.
The chat's good. Thanks, Christine.
Okay. All right, so we do have a sample search log available that's online if you want to download it and use it. You can also just create your own version like in Excel or something if you like. But the important thing is that you capture all the relevant information. All right, so likewise, a lot of times free literature is something that people look for, right? So the difference, and if I recall, Janice mentioned this the other day, she'll probably mention it again next time. Gray literature is stuff that's not published by a publisher, right? So publishing is not their main business. It might be something from the government. It might be, you know, a non-government organization, be all kinds of things, right? And also, I see the list here, conferences is listed, mainly because it's not, I mean, in databases, you do find conference abstracts listed, but it's not quite the same category as an article, right? So when you're doing gray literature searches, it's a little bit of a different process, right? Databases are very structured, right, as we've seen. But if, for example, you're looking for, you know, reports from government or something, you can't necessarily, like there are some databases that have some of these things, but you can't necessarily use the same tools. So a lot of times gray literature involves like searching and screening at the same time, right? So like think of a Google search. You're doing a search and you're going through the results. You're not collecting everything that's on the results page, right? To look at. You're kind of screening at the same time. So a lot of the times the librarians will say gray literature searching is up to you, right? Because of the screening element, you need to apply the subject expertise that you have. We don't have that, right? But you do need to keep track of where you looked, the date that you looked, what was found, keep some notes. We have a sample gray literature search log that is available. I also have one example here. It is a little on the small side. Let me see if I can make the text a little bigger without getting rid of too much. Okay, so this search log was not for a systematic or scoping review. It was for a different exercise, but I've got it here. This first line here I added for the purposes of our discussion today, right? So we've got a date. It was April the 5th. I went to the Manitoba Hydro website. That's my source. This is what I typed in the box, right? I've got comments to say that this one was for this particular demo. And I found a couple of things that might be relevant, right? So this particular search, if you're wondering, is about looking for wetland compensation plans in Canada, right? So this is a earth science, environmental science kind of question, right? But as you go down, my source is Google, right? That's the source. I've got my search string, what I looked for. You know, I've got my comments to myself. This particular search string got me lots of stuff about like how to do a compensation plan, what to include, but you know, not as many of the actual examples as I might have liked. But going through the results, here are some things that I found that might be useful, right? So I've got the title, I've got the link, right? And so that was search number 1. I modified that a little bit. So that's a new search string. It's still same date, still Google. In this case, I didn't get much different, right? So I've kind of got the list of results, bridging them to them. Then I took another approach, right? Still same date, still Google. Now these are the search terms that I've looked for. I've got my comments, right? Still lots of policy and stuff, but maybe I've got this thing. I've said this question. Well, that's a maybe. And then as I keep going, different iterations, different search terms, I can gather what I found and then go from there, right? Questions or thoughts or comments about either of these logs?
Nothing in the chat other than just directing people to where to find some of these sample logs.
Okay, great. So that's all. Oops, too quick. That's all stuff to keep track of. I will comment also. Sometimes when you're doing a review, it's necessary to contact authors, right? So you have an article or a conference abstract, right? And you need to contact the authors to get more information. Maybe you need that information to see whether this would be something that you would include or exclude. Or it might be later on that you're asking for additional data, right? So there's something that you need that it's not reported in their article. You can always ask for it. I'm told that there are mixed results, right? Some authors are happy to share, others you might not have some luck, but this is also something to keep track of, right? So if there's an author that you contact, you're going to want to keep track of when you contacted them. Maybe you want to keep a copy of the email, keep track of if and when they got back to you, if you sent a follow-up email, all that kind of stuff, right? Because if there's someone you just can't get hold of, or they just don't reply, and you need to exclude something, well, that's an exclusion reason, right? And when we do our write-ups, we include the reasons why things were excluded. Okay. All right, so we're making good time here. We're going to go back to Menti.
I'm Christine. Sorry, just
Yes.
before you go ahead, I just had a question and thought other people might be interested. Maybe if you could just talk a little bit about the press checklist and that form of documentation.
Well, the press checklist is a guideline that librarians and information professionals use to peer review literature searches. So this is something that's intended for librarians and information professionals, because even though it says, yes, look at subject headings, you still have to have a very good understanding of the use and improper use of subject headings, right? So I generally don't advise that non-librarians use press for their searches, because it's not intended for that audience. Any other questions?
Nope, that was it. Thank you.
Thanks. All right. So let's go back to Menti. Just as a quick consolidation of knowledge, I've got some questions for you. First question, what is wrong with this statement? The review was conducted according to PRISMA guidelines. This is a free text answer. Okay, so we have some answers, pardon me. So I'm going to assume that everybody who wants to answer has answered. The problem with this statement, the review was conducted according to PRISMA guidelines, is that PRISMA is a reporting guideline. The R in PRISMA stands for reporting, preferred reporting items for systematic review and meta-analysis. PRISMA does not tell you how to do a systematic review. It tells you what to include in your article. If you are doing a systematic review or a scoping review, you need to use the methodological guidelines, right? So like the Cochrane guidelines, the JBI guidelines, the Campbell guidelines, or other guidelines suitable for your review type for what you're doing. Okay. So PRISMA is only about writing. So why should you save your search histories in a personal database account? Okay, thank you for paying attention. It is easy to rerun later. For the record, we will not get mad at you. We just might be sad on your behalf because you might have a lot of work ahead of you when it comes time to rerun. What information should you include in the file name of a downloaded RIS text file? Yes, all of the above. All of this information so that you can identify exactly what you're working with. Okay, I believe this is the last one. What information about the literature search do you need to keep for your records? Yes, absolutely all of the above. Well done. We all know now what we need to keep. So excellent. Good luck. If you ever run into questions about documentation, you can still ask us. You can contact the library, and we can talk things through. Okay. All right. So that does it for us. We went to Menti. There is an evaluation form. Mê-Linh is going to put that link in the chat. And if you would like to give us your feedback on the session, that would be great. We do have the feedback form for the individual sessions. So please, if you're going to attend all of them, do the individual evaluations forms rather than just one big one at the end. That way we can keep things straight. All right. So we have 5 minutes left for questions. Look at that. How are we doing? Do we have questions that you want me to take from the chat? Mê-Linh?
Sure. I was just typing it out, but maybe you could answer it. So it's shorter. Is when you create a personal account on the databases, will they still have access to those databases through the university when you sign in by your personal account?
So to access the database itself, you need to go in through the library, right? So you need to go into Medline or CINAHL or CAB Abstracts or whatever through the library first, which makes you sign in with your library account. And then you sign in with your personal account, right? So they're unconnected in that the library doesn't know anything about your personal account, like that's not connected to our system, but you have to go through our system first to get to the database. Is that answering the question?
Yeah, it does.
Good question.
And nothing else in the chat as of right now that hasn't been addressed.
Okay. Good to know. Well, in that case, thank you very much for coming. We've mentioned before, all the librarians here at the library are available to help the library, the university community. Mê-Linh, Janice, and myself, in particular, help out folks who are doing KS in the radi health sciences. So if you ever have questions or you're running into problems with something, you can always make an appointment with us, or you can send us an email or something like that. Our contact is on the website. Yeah, and if that's all the questions for today, then get on with the rest of your afternoon and have a great long weekend. Thanks again for coming.